All right, so get ready because we're about to take a deep dive into something pretty unsettling: corruption in Ukraine. But, and this is important, we're not just looking at, like petty bribery or anything. We're going deep, like systemically deep. And we're using, well, the perspectives of people in Ukraine itself.
It's almost like trying to map a hidden network. One that operates beneath the surface of what we usually see in the news.
Exactly. And to start us off, we've got a story that honestly sounds like straight out of a spy movie. So there's this judge, Semen Stetsenko. He's currently on the Ukrainian Supreme Court, and he's been accused of, get this, holding dual citizenship with Russia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it gets crazier. There's also this allegation that he served as a lieutenant colonel in the Russian Ministry of Defense.
I mean, just imagine the potential for conflicts of interest here. We're not even just talking about legal technicalities at this point, but someone who may have sworn allegiance to another country, potentially having influence over decisions that impact Ukraine's entire legal system.
It's pretty wild. And the more you kind of dig into the details of this guy, the stranger it gets. You find inconsistencies in his background, missing records. There are even these like whispers about his Wikipedia page being scrubbed. It's like tracking a ghost or something.
Yeah, one of the biggest red flags for me is the lack of transparency around his Ukrainian documentation. Like when journalists started digging into this, the Supreme Court actually claimed that essential documents were missing from his file. Stuff like his Ukrainian passport and his oath of allegiance, they just, poof, disappeared.
So it really does sound like a cover-up then.
It really does.
But here's the thing that gets me. Despite all of this, both the Ukrainian parliament and President Zelensky's office, they've come out and publicly said that they have full confidence in this judge and in the court. It just makes you wonder, what are they not telling us?
It definitely raises a lot of questions. And the seemingly isolated case of this judge, it could actually be a symptom of a much bigger problem. There's a growing concern about a whole network of individuals within the Ukrainian government who have these, ties to Russia, and they could be influencing decisions at the highest levels.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna have to unpack that for me. What kind of network are we talking about here?
So, well, let's start with Andriy Yermak. He's President Zelensky's chief of staff, so obviously a very powerful figure. But there are these allegations linking him to a pro-Russian political party back in the day, and even some whispers about connections to organized crime.
Well, hold on. So the president's like right-hand man could potentially be entangled with pro-Russian groups and criminal elements. That's a pretty big claim. Is there like any evidence to back that up?
Well, it's based on, investigative reports and analysis from Ukrainian journalists and political commentators, people who have been following these connections for years now. And the details are, obviously complex, but it's a pattern that's hard to ignore.
Okay, so we've got this judge with potential Russian ties, and then the president's chief of staff with these, alleged connections. Who else is involved in this network?
Another figure who keeps popping up is Oleg Todorov. He's currently the deputy head of the Office of the President. And his history is, well, alarming to say the least. He was allegedly involved in persecuting anti-government protesters during the Yanukovych presidency, which, if you need a reminder, that was a regime known for its pro-Russian stance. And they were eventually ousted, in a popular uprising.
Right. So this guy, Todorov, he went from persecuting people who were against a pro-Russian regime to working for the current government in a high-ranking position. How does that even happen?
It's a good question. A lot of people are asking that. And what makes it even more worrying is that he now oversees law enforcement agencies, which has understandably led to fears about undue influence and a potential crackdown on dissent.
And this is starting to sound like less of a coincidence and more like a deliberate strategy to infiltrate these key positions of power within the Ukrainian government.
I think that's a valid concern. And it doesn't stop there. Let's not forget about the security service of Ukraine, the SBU. They're supposed to be protecting the country, from internal and external threats. But the current head, Vasyl Malyuk, he's described as an associate of, you guessed it, Todorov.
Wait, so the guy in charge of security might be connected to someone with ties to Russia? I mean, that's terrifying. Are people not freaking out about this?
There are a lot of people within Ukraine who are deeply concerned about this. There are claims that the SBU is basically being controlled by individuals with ties to Russia, and that obviously raises serious questions about, the organization's integrity and its ability to actually protect Ukraine's national security.
This is mind-blowing. We've got a Supreme Court judge, the president's chief of staff, a top official in the office of the president, and the head of the SBU, all potentially linked to Russian in some way. It's like this web of corruption has just spread through the entire system.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's just the tip of the iceberg. This web of alleged corruption, it goes beyond just individuals. It reaches deep into, the heart of Ukraine's financial systems, especially those that are managing funds that are meant for the war effort and humanitarian aid.
You're telling me there's corruption surrounding the money that's supposed to help Ukraine defend itself?
That's unfortunately the picture that's starting to emerge. There are claims that the Ukrainian government is spending way more money on peacetime purchases for the government itself than on weaponry for the military. And, this is happening while the country is actively at war.
That's outrageous. How can they even try to justify that? I mean, are they seriously prioritizing like government luxury over the needs of their soldiers and their citizens?
It's hard to comprehend, especially when you consider that the military budget has reportedly been cut almost in half, while spending on things like office furniture and vehicles for government officials is continuing.
So while their soldiers are on the front lines, potentially lacking essential equipment, government officials are getting like comfy new offices. What is going on here?
It's really a head scratcher. These discrepancies in spending, they're raising some major red flags about, the priorities of the Ukrainian government. You would think that, during a war, their primary focus would be on supporting the military and providing aid to those who are affected by the conflict.
100%. Yeah. I mean, every hryvnia should be going towards defending the country and protecting its people, but it sounds like that's not happening.
Yeah, that's the disturbing reality that's coming out of these reports. There are even claims that Ukraine is spending like 3 times more on peacetime government purchases through this platform called Prozoro, which is basically an online system that they use for government procurement, and they're spending 3 times more on that than they are on weapons for their military.
This is unbelievable. So where's all this money coming from if they're cutting the military budget?
Well, this is where things get even more troubling. There are reports of these massive VAT scams that are happening within the Customs Department, and these scams are allegedly generating more revenue than the amount that's being spent on weaponry.
Hold on, you're saying that they're making more money from illegal activities than they're spending on defending their own country?
That's the claim. The figures that are being reported are pretty staggering. We're talking 530 billion hryvnias from these VAT scams versus 488 billion hryvnias that were spent on weaponry. And if these numbers are accurate, it paints a very dark picture of financial mismanagement and misplaced priorities within the Ukrainian government.
I mean, it's almost as if they're profiting from corruption while their country's at war. It's crazy. And what makes it even more perplexing is that there are actually like differing opinions within Ukraine itself about how to deal with this issue of corruption.
Right. And this is where we come across a pretty crucial voice, I think. Vitaly Portnikov, he's a prominent Ukrainian commentator, and he's got this controversial argument. He suggests that combating corruption might actually destabilize the country.
Wait, he's saying that fighting corruption is bad for Ukraine. How does that even make sense?
Well, his argument is that the current system, even though it's, riddled with corruption, it's what's holding the country together right now. He even goes so far as to imply that certain Ukrainian elites, he calls them aristocrats, that they should be exempt from fighting in the war.
Yeah, that's a very controversial stance. It's almost like he's saying that corruption is just an unavoidable part of Ukrainian society.
Yeah.
And that certain people are above the law.
It's definitely a perspective that really highlights the complexities of the situation. While most people agree that corruption is a problem, there are these differing opinions about how to address it, and even about whether it's even possible to get rid of it completely.
But isn't this guy's perspective kind of dangerous? especially if he has a platform to spread these ideas.
Yeah, that's a valid concern because despite, how controversial his views are, Portnikov, he has significant influence, particularly within government-funded media. So that raises questions about, potential bias in the information that's being given to the Ukrainian public and whether, certain narratives about corruption are being kind of deliberately controlled.
Man, this is getting really complicated. It's like there are layers upon layers of corruption and conflicting agendas at play here.
It's definitely a tangled web, and it gets even more tangled when we start to consider, American involvement in Ukraine, particularly the role of U.S. side funding. There have been some recent allegations about misuse of these funds, which has actually led to a 90-day pause so they can do an audit.
Wait a second. So even the aid money that's meant to help Ukraine is potentially caught up in all this corruption. That's a whole other level of mess.
It's definitely a development that's caused a lot of concern, especially among Ukrainian organizations that rely on that USAID funding. This pause has caused, a lot of anxiety and uncertainty because there are fears that crucial programs and services could be disrupted.
So what are the specific allegations about the misuse of these funds? What are these organizations being accused of doing?
Well, there are claims that some organizations use USAID funds to promote certain agendas that don't align with, the intended purpose of the aid. These agendas include things like land privatization, LGBT rights, and the Black Lives Matter movement.
Hold on. Are you saying that American aid money was potentially used to push political agendas in Ukraine? That's a pretty serious accusation.
It's a complicated situation for sure, and it raises questions about transparency and accountability. If these allegations are true, it suggests a pretty concerning level of foreign influence in shaping Ukrainian society and politics.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
So we've got potential corruption within the Ukrainian government. We've got allegations of Russian influence, and now we've got concerns about American aid money being misused to push specific agendas. It's like everyone is trying to pull the strings in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's a very tangled web, and it gets even more twisted when we consider the responses of some of the individuals and organizations that are involved.
Okay, tell me more. What kind of responses are we talking about?
Well, with this funding pause and audit looming, some individuals within these organizations are reportedly trying to rebrand themselves. Basically, they're trying to shift their public image to appear more conservative.
So they're basically trying to change their tune to align with a different political ideology. Why would they do that?
It seems like a strategic move to try and secure future funding with the possibility of a more conservative administration in the U.S. These individuals are seemingly trying to position themselves to make sure they still have access to resources.
So it just sounds like pure opportunism. Are there any specific examples of this rebranding effort?
One that comes to mind is there was this conservative forum that was held in Kiev. And the interesting thing is that some of the featured speakers at this forum, they have alleged ties to George Soros, who, as you know, is a prominent figure who's known for his support of liberal causes. That
seems incredibly contradictory. It's like they're trying to have it both ways, aligning themselves with conservative values, but then also maintaining these connections to figures who are associated with opposing ideologies.
Yeah, it really speaks to the fluidity and the complexity of the political landscape in Ukraine. Alliances can shift so quickly, and it can be really difficult to tell, what are genuine ideological commitments and what are just strategic maneuvers that are aimed at holding on to power and access to resources.
This whole situation is mind-boggling. It's clear that there's so much more to uncover here.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely eager to dig deeper.
Well, let's continue our exploration in part two. It's fascinating, how in a place like Ukraine, where things are so volatile, these alliances can just shift so quickly, and people can just seemingly change their political stripes almost like overnight, just for personal gain.
Yeah, it's like everyone's playing this high stakes poker game where everyone's bluffing and trying to outmaneuver each other.
Yeah.
But in this game, the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking about the future of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the lives of real people.
And that's exactly the point, I think, that we can't afford to lose sight of. While we're here unraveling this intricate web of of corruption and political maneuvering, we have to remember that these aren't just abstract concepts. They have real world consequences for ordinary Ukrainians.
You're absolutely right. It's easy to get kind of caught up in the political drama and the who's who of this whole network, and forget about the human impact.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us back to that challenge we talked about before, about trying to figure out what's truth and what's propaganda. How can the average Ukrainian citizen who's being bombarded with all this conflicting information, how can they possibly figure out what's really going on?
It's like a minefield out there.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider how those in power can actually control the narrative. Like remember we were talking about Vitaly Portnikov, the commentator who downplays the whole corruption issue. Well, he has a platform in government funded media. So his message is reaching a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how those in power can shape public perception, by promoting certain voices and then suppressing others. They can create this echo chamber where dissenting opinions are just drowned out.
It's like they're trying to control what people think, to make them believe that corruption is just a fact of life, something they have to accept.
And that makes it incredibly difficult to hold those in power accountable, because if people believe that corruption is just inevitable, they're not going to demand change.
Right. It's a recipe for complacency.
Yeah.
Which just allows corruption to flourish even more. And we haven't even talked about the potential for foreign influence in all of this. I mean, it's not just internal forces at play here.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about the allegations of Russian ties within the Ukrainian government, but now we're also seeing these claims of American influence, especially with the allegations around U.S. side funding.
It's almost as if Ukraine has become this battleground for different ideologies.
Yeah.
With both Russia and the United States kind of vying for influence.
Yeah. And that makes the stakes even higher. Because Ukraine's future isn't just determined by its own internal dynamics. It's deeply entangled with the interests of global powers.
It's like a geopolitical tug of war with Ukraine caught right in the middle.
Exactly. And the Ukrainian people are the ones who are stuck navigating this treacherous path, trying to assert their independence and forge their own future amidst all of these competing forces.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the issue of money for a second. We were talking about that alarming claim that the revenue that's generated from those VAT scams in the Customs Department is allegedly bigger than the amount that they spend on weaponry for the war effort.
Right. That's a really stark illustration of how corruption can just divert resources away from vital needs, especially during a conflict. It really underscores the need for greater transparency and accountability in how government funds are managed and spent.
And it's not just about where the money is going; it's also about where it's not going. We heard claims that the military budget has been significantly cut, which seems completely illogical considering there's a war going on.
It's definitely a perplexing decision, and it raises some serious questions about the government's priorities. Is there some strategic rationale behind this move, or is it a sign of mismanagement, incompetence, or even something more sinister?
It's hard to think of any logical reason why you would cut military funding while your country is actively defending itself against an invasion. It just doesn't add up.
Right. And the consequences of that decision are potentially devastating because the soldiers on the front lines, the ones who are risking their lives to defend Ukraine, they're the ones who suffer the most when they don't have the essential equipment or resources that they need.
Yeah, it's a betrayal of those who are putting their lives on the line for their country. And it highlights the urgent need for accountability. I mean, the Ukrainian people deserve answers. They deserve to know why their government is making decisions that seem to undermine their security and their well-being. Absolutely.
This isn't just about, numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about the lives of real people.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've uncovered this intricate web of corruption. We've explored these allegations of foreign influence, and we've kind of grappled with the complexities of truth and propaganda. I mean,
Yeah.
what does all this mean for the future of Ukraine?
That's the question we need to really delve into, and it's a question with profound implications, not just for Ukraine, but for the wider geopolitical landscape as well.
So we've spent this whole deep dive looking at some really troubling allegations about corruption in Ukraine, from the top levels of government all the way to how funds for the war are being misused. It's a pretty bleak picture, honestly.
Yeah, it is. The situation is definitely cause for concern, but I think understanding just how big and how deep this problem goes is the first step to actually addressing it. You can't fight an enemy you don't even acknowledge.
True. But where do we even begin with something like this? It feels like corruption is so baked into the system that it's almost impossible to untangle.
It's a huge challenge, no doubt, but I don't think it's impossible to overcome. Change it starts with awareness, with shining a light on those dark corners and just refusing to accept corruption as just the way things are.
So you're saying that just talking about these issues like we are now, that's actually part of the solution.
Absolutely. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? By having these conversations, by demanding transparency and accountability from those in power, we're helping to create a more informed and engaged citizenry.
And that brings us back to something we talked about before, about the importance of listening to different voices, particularly those within Ukraine itself. We can't just rely on narratives from the outside. We need to understand the perspectives of the people who are living through this reality every day.
Exactly. The voices of Ukrainian citizens, journalists, activists, commentators, they're essential to piecing together this puzzle of what's actually happening on the ground. They provide insights and experiences that are often missed in mainstream media coverage.
It's like the difference between reading a travel guide and actually talking to someone who lives in a specific country.
Yeah.
The firsthand accounts give you a level of depth and authenticity that you just can't get from sources that are looking in from the outside.
Right, exactly. Those firsthand accounts, they can challenge our assumptions. They can expand our understanding, and ultimately they can lead to a more nuanced and informed perspective.
It's about getting the full picture. Understanding the complexities of the situation without oversimplifying or jumping to easy conclusions.
And that's really what we've tried to do in this deep dive, to explore this issue of corruption in Ukraine from different angles, to consider different perspectives, and to really wrestle with the uncomfortable realities that we've uncovered.
It's been a tough journey for sure, but incredibly important. I think we dove into allegations of misconduct in the judicial system, financial mismanagement, foreign influence, the manipulation of the information.
Right, and we saw how all of these things are connected, how they create this system where corruption seems to just seep into every level of society, undermining the very foundations of democracy and justice.
It's a sobering thought, but I think it's crucial to face these uncomfortable truths head on if we want to see any real change.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that change is possible. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to require a collective effort from both people within Ukraine and from the international community as well.
So what can we actually do? What are some concrete steps that can be taken to address this widespread corruption?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to continue supporting the work of investigative journalists and activists within Ukraine, the people who are working tirelessly to expose these issues. They're the ones on the front lines, risking their safety, their reputations to uncover the truth.
And what about the role of international organizations and governments? What can they do to help?
Well, they can play a really important role in promoting transparency and accountability by holding Ukrainian officials accountable for their actions, and by making sure that aid money is actually used for its intended purpose.
So it sounds like it's going to take a multifaceted approach, one that involves both internal pressure for reform and external support for the people who are fighting for a more just and transparent Ukraine.
Exactly. It's not a battle that can be won by any one group or entity. It's going to take a collective effort, a shared commitment to to fighting corruption and to upholding democratic principles.
It's a fight worth having, not just for the sake of Ukraine, but for the sake of all nations that are striving for a world where integrity and accountability and the rule of law, actually prevail.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. It's been a dense conversation and a challenging one, but I hope it's given everyone some food for thought and maybe inspired some further exploration of this really complex issue.
I agree. It's been an eye-opening experience for sure. And I encourage all our listeners to keep researching, to keep questioning, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue about the challenges facing Ukraine and the broader fight against corruption globally.
Remember, awareness is the first step to change.
Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.